Hi. So I'm going to continue talking about religion. Um, so you might think, what exactly do religions do? So they do a few different things, and I probably can't list them all. But one of the things is they tell you what is out there. Okay, so the kind of shared beliefs about the universe, who made the world, who made you, what happens after you die, that sort of thing, which sometimes people refer to as that's the faith of the religion. Then another thing is they tell you the morality, the what should you do, the right and wrong. Then there's also other aspects like they tell you they have certain rituals and practices, things like praying or going to church. And then another thing is that you have the community, so to speak. You have the rest of the church, which you do these practices together with. Um, and, sometimes you get things um, like you run charities together and things like that. So the Catholic Church in Australia, as well as in other countries, has run things like schools and hospitals with a faith basis and things like that. But what I wanted to talk about more today was that second thing about the morality. I wanted to look at one particular question and see how we come to decide what's right and wrong. So I want to look at the commandment, you shall not kill, which is one of the Ten Commandments. It's in Exodus 20:13. So that's in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That's been revealed to us by God, but it might also, go well with whatever philosophy we had about right and wrong pre-existing that, so to speak. Um, or anyway, and so then it applies to, obvious cases. You don't just randomly go and kill someone, but then we also have a lot of modern questions, things like euthanasia, where sick people are terminated by doctors, things like abortion, where unborn children are terminated by their mothers and medical professionals, things like the death penalty, where people are terminated by the state because they're criminals. So there's just a whole bunch of questions, and if you've been following some of the religious news, you might have heard that the church changed what it says about the death penalty, although I wouldn't really say it changed its teaching. But anyway, that's something we can look into later. Um, okay, so let's have a look at some of the reasons why we think that it might be bad to kill someone. Um, Here's something interesting. I remember when I was getting superannuation, it included some insurance that would cover things like death or disablement on the job. This was back in 2004. I don't know if they still bundle superannuation with insurance anymore. But one of the things that I noticed was that the payout for total permanent disablement was something like 50 times higher than the payout for death. And I thought, that's weird. Isn't dying worse than being disabled? But in a way, it makes sense that if you die, well, you don't really need anyone to look after you after that because you're dead. But if you're disabled, well, it will cost a lot of money to look after you. So, for example, you'll need a wheelchair, or depending on the kind of disability that you get while you're on the job. So that was a kind of at-work insurance. But anyway, it brings up this question about. Oh, so the interesting thing about the death payout, which was something like $10,000, was that I think it was really just, it wasn't meant to be a kind of life insurance for your family. I think it was just meant to cover funeral costs, basically. Oh, I didn't realise there was a monster here. No wonder my teammates were losing their. Okay, their minds. So let's go back to the question: if you kill somebody, is it bad? And I mean, like, we intrinsically know the answer is yes, but here we're trying to explain why, in a sense. And it's like, well, is it bad for the person you killed? It's like, well, not really, because they're dead. Like, if you didn't, I mean, sure, when we know that we're going to die, we might feel regrets about the fact that we don't have more of a life to live. Or if we die in pain, the last few moments of our life might not be very pleasant. But if somebody just came up to you from behind, you didn't know they were there, and just killed you instantly, you didn't realize that you'd been killed, you wouldn't really suffer, you wouldn't even really feel regret. You say, well, if there is an afterlife, it's like, are you up in heaven being mad at the person who just killed you? But if we believe certain things about the afterlife, you might say, if you're in heaven, well, you'd be happy and you wouldn't care. What if you were in hell? Well, then, you have a lot of other things to be mad about. But it kind of, if we say that the reason why it's bad to kill people is because people wouldn't like to be killed, it's like, I'm not sure that completely holds up. Although I think that's part of it. Alright, so let's think of it from another point of view. Okay, which is that it's bad to kill someone because we don't want to be killed, and so we set up a social contract where we agree not to kill anyone else so that they have to agree not to kill us. Okay, that's how a social contract works, is that we kind of like agree to things, and so we agree to things not because, maybe we would like to have the option to kill other people, but what we want even more is not to have to worry about other people maybe killing us. So then by all agreeing to that contract, well, then that means that, it basically takes away the fear that somebody might kill you. Okay, because it's in everybody's benefit to agree to the contract, and when new children are born into our society, they're kind of inducted into whatever social contract we have, and to remain part of the society, you have to agree to it. Okay, but then if we say that's the reason why it's not okay to kill people just because it's a breach of social contract, that means, well, you could have a society where people don't have that agreement, a sort of a Wild West type of thing where people agree, actually, we're going to make the rules that you are allowed to kill other people, but also they're allowed to kill you. And so everybody has to defend themselves at all times. So, that society would suck to live in. The question is it, in a way, like, morally worse? Is it bad to have those sort of rules for a society, or is it just an alternative society to what we have here? So the idea is it necessary that the rules for a society should include an agreement not to kill each other? And I think that is the case, that a good society would have that rule, so that it can't just be a breach of social contract. There should be some, I guess you would say, transcendent reason, independent of the people who have agreed to it, that you shouldn't kill people. So let's go on and consider another option. Let's say, well, it's bad to kill people because it's non-consensual. Okay, so the idea is that consent is a big thing in the morality you hear about these days. You say, it's a particular person's body in this case, and they don't want others to make decisions about their body, in the sense of, the body is the thing that you're killing. All right, and we say the same thing about, for example, you don't want to be raped. It's like, well, another person can't decide for you that you have to have sex with them. All right, so in the same way, another person can't decide for you when you die. Okay, and this is where we might talk about the issue of euthanasia. The idea is, well, euthanasia doesn't have this problem, because euthanasia is the patient has to consent to being euthanized. Okay, but then you say, well, in that case, what about just a person who wants to kill themselves? So when we talk about suicide, we don't usually talk about it as in that right and wrong sort of sense. But imagine, for example, we could say that it's wrong to kill yourself, maybe. But imagine that a person got a friend to kill them. So it's like they wanted to commit suicide, but they didn't want to pull the trigger themselves. So they said to their friend, I consent to you killing me. Now, this might raise some practical problems, okay, which is like that, how do we know that the person consented, or if the friend just made a fake kind of document or a fake recording that made it look like it was consensual, but really it was just murder. So there's that sort of, how do you prove that it was a kind of consensual suicide? But the other thing is that it just seems like it would be wrong anyway. And we usually say, well, it's sad when somebody kills themselves, and we don't think they should, even though we might understand that they were suffering from the psychological problem. Well, let's just do a quick aside when we talk about suicide, right? If we were to say that that a person who kills themselves is acting irrationally, okay, and that a lot of the time that is the case. You have mental problems, and you don't think straight, and so then you think that killing yourself is a good idea, right? But are we going to say that wanting to survive is such a normal thing for a human to want to do that a person who commits suicide is always irrational, they're always nuts? Because if we say that, then there's no rational reason why anyone would ever want to kill themselves. Well, then we're saying that it's a transcendent rule that you shouldn't kill yourself. Okay, because, it's kind of like a cheat way of saying that. Sorry, I'm kind of having trouble explaining this. You can see that we're kind of cheating if we were to say that a person could consent to it, but it's always irrational to do it, so that nobody ever would. Well, then, in that case, if you never would, then how can we say that you can? Okay. If otherwise, the alternative is that we have to admit that maybe sometimes a person could be rationally choosing it. Okay, so then this is when we come and talk about the difference between euthanasia and suicide. Alright, well, euthanasia is usually for people who are terminally ill. Whereas suicide, maybe it could be a young person who was depressed or something like that. And so we say, again, if we said that it's never rational to want to kill yourself, well, that includes the scenario of euthanasia. That means we automatically agree that nobody should ever want to kill themselves, even if they're terminally ill, or for any other reason. But on the other hand, if we say that people sometimes could be rationally choosing it, then that means maybe someone who wants to be euthanized does, but it also means that somebody who might want to just kill themselves would be. Okay, so the question is, are we comfortable with accepting that conclusion? And so, well, the difference with euthanasia is you're not really taking time off your life. Well, you're taking a few days off your life, right? But then that means that, so maybe you're only dying a week sooner than you would have if you hadn't been euthanized. It's like, well, that's still a week. It's like, what's the difference between that and a young person who is dying 60 years sooner than if they hadn't killed themselves? Still, everybody's going to die eventually. So to say that the reason why it's justified is you're going to die soon, is you then have to quantify how soon does it have to be. You say, well, okay, the other reason could be a question of quality of life. But then, alright, when you're being euthanized, you're physically sick. And so then you don't want to live with it. But a lot of people who commit suicide, well, the reason why they think that suicide is an answer to their problems is because they think that their life is worse than being dead would be. And so we can't really, I find it difficult to come up with a justification for why it would be okay for terminally ill people to kill themselves if we wouldn't also agree that sometimes we'd agree with just an ordinary person making that decision to kill themselves, which I don't think is the conclusion that we want to come to. We say that, it's always sad when somebody kills themselves. And, then if we were to talk about morality, it's like not to compound the way people feel about themselves anyway. But in my religion, when we say you shouldn't kill people, well, we also mean you shouldn't kill yourself. And so and there's a question, and that sort of also addresses the question before about consensual suicide. So not just killing yourself, but having somebody else kill you. Well, if you're not supposed to do the first, then you wouldn't be supposed to do the second of those things either. So to me, it seems like we can't. So what are the possibilities we already considered? We said, well, maybe it's because people don't want to be killed. And we said that doesn't really seem like it addresses the reason why you shouldn't kill people. Then we said maybe it's because it goes against the social contract and we've agreed not to kill each other. We said no, there has to be more to it than that. We said maybe it's because it's non-consensual, so it's violating somebody's autonomy. We said no, it has to be more than that. All right, so those are the options we've come up with. I apologise for that beeping. That's just my washing machine telling me that it's done. And I'll as soon as I finish this map, I'll go and turn the beeping noise off. Until then, you'll just have to put up with it being in the recording. Okay, so next option. If I can think of what I was going to say, then I'll let you know. So, why should we not kill people? Okay, let's consider like an economic reason. Okay, so there is such a thing as the statistical value of human life, which is when we're making decisions about, for example, medical treatments or safety measures like having fire extinguishers and stuff, we have to say, how much money would we spend per life saved? Okay, and it usually works out roughly around up to $8 million we'd be willing to spend on a safety measure that statistically we would expect to save one life on average. But that's not the same thing like something that happens by accident, which we can spend to prevent. Unless you're utilitarian, you wouldn't consider that to be the same thing as directly killing someone. So one of them is incremental, We might say stealing $8 million is the same as doing $8 million worth of vandalism of property, for example, but actually killing somebody wouldn't be the same as doing $8 million worth of vandalism of property because it's categorically different. Okay, it's qualitatively different. So it's not just the economic reason that that killing somebody is the same as destroying property. Okay, since I've finished the map, I'll go and turn off that beeping sound and then I'll come back and keep talking. Okay, here's another reason, is that when you kill somebody, it doesn't, even if it doesn't hurt the person you killed, it hurts the people who love them, the people who care about them. So we could say, is killing people bad because it upsets the people who care about them? And then this is interesting when we start talking about abortion, because the idea is that people who want to have a baby don't have abortions, but people who get pregnant and don't want to keep their baby, well, then they have abortions. And they say, well, nobody else necessarily even knows that I'm pregnant, so they don't care about my child. And so if I don't want the child is completely unwanted, at least by people. Even if there are people who are pro-life and they say we don't think you should kill this child, doesn't mean that they know that specific child personally. And again, going back to the economic argument, it's like, well, no money has been spent on raising this child, so we don't lose anything by killing the child. So, because you could imagine, for example, a kid you've just paid $10,000 to put them through school, and then someone kills them. Not only have you lost the person you cared about, you've also lost the money that you spent educating them, right? Which, again, it shouldn't really be the main consideration here. But what I'm saying is, okay, so is it about other people's emotional cares and or other people's investments? Okay, but then if we were to say the reason it's okay to abort an unborn baby is because no one cares about them, then you could also say, well, couldn't we find a person who no one cared about just by chance? Maybe they're homeless, they have no family or friends, and then would it be okay to kill them? Because you're not affecting the person you're killing because they don't know that they're about to die, and you're not affecting anyone else because nobody else noticed that this person even existed, so therefore no one cares. All right, and I think that we would say, well, no, that's not a justification for killing somebody, is just because no one else cares about them. So then this suggests, I've considered a whole bunch of options. Feel free to talk to me about some more options. We start to come to the idea that maybe you just shouldn't kill people. If we believe that you shouldn't kill people, but we can't explain why, then, we say, well, it just is. This kind of thing that it's the kind of way that God intended us to live, so to speak. Okay, that or even if you don't believe in God, it's kind of like there are rules for how humans ought to behave. It's kind of like following these rules in a sense is being human, and not following them is to not live the way that a human should. And another way we could talk about it is by saying maybe the killing of another person is not so much about what it does to the other person, but what it does to you, the killer. And in religion we would say that it affects your soul because it's a sin and sin's bad. But there's a lot of reasons, a lot of kind of partial explanations for why we shouldn't kill people. But it also seems like that we have to accept that there's some sort of reason that's beyond us, that's beyond just the physical world that we're trying to explain, the attitudes that we take towards it. But there's something more, something we're bound to that we didn't choose for ourselves, but that's come on us from above. And so that is why I think that we have these kinds of rules that God's given us. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. And so on. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbour. I won't recite all of them for you right now. Okay. What was I trying to say? I'm pretty much done here. I didn't mention the death penalty, so I'll talk about that briefly now just before I wrap up. So the idea is that we have this rule or commandment from God, thou shalt not kill. Okay, and it seems like, well, if somebody commits a crime, is it okay to kill them? And if you look at the rule and it says you shall not kill, it's like, well, no, you can't. And the previous version of the Catechism kind of said an exception if the only way to prevent a criminal from reoffending, especially if you're worried they were going to kill someone else, was to put them to the death penalty. So if, the jail couldn't hold them, either because they had minions outside who could work for them or because they could escape, well, then you might end up justifying why you're killing somebody on the basis of you need to do it to protect the community. The idea is that God's law doesn't work so much on a matter of precedent, in the sense that, well, one time we killed somebody because we were able to justify it and therefore we can in the future. Rather, I would say that each situation has to be justified from scratch. So, that by default the rule would always remain the same, you shall not kill. And unless you can newly find, you can say, well, this is the reason why I'm not obeying that commandment this time, you would always have to. So this idea now that the church is now saying, well, we're opposed to capital punishment, which was true before, is we always have been, because it's always been the rule that we shouldn't kill someone. And any country which happens to have a rule that says for certain crimes, like in US, capital murder, for example, can be punished by death in some states, well, that state isn't following the rules of the church, and they weren't following the rules of the church even before we changed how the catechism was worded, because we always said that there's only very narrow exceptions to this rule, which you would need to justify in each case. And the state is definitely applying the exceptions more broadly than the church intended. And so with the new wording, which just says, look, we don't believe in capital punishment, it doesn't change whether or not those states in the US are in line with the church teaching. They're still not. And it just becomes more clearer of the fact that, we don't approve of the death penalty. All right, thanks for listening. Hope to hear from you soon.